Good afternoon, everyone. We're on the second class of our polyamory, I think it's gay polyamory class, utopia or disaster. We call that, I think we call this class that because so many people view it as one or the other, the extreme. And one of the things we have been liking to say lately is it's kind of both and everything in between, just like everything is. It's just a slightly different reality, a way of doing things, way of looking at things.
Different way of looking at things, definitely.
We're still humans going through the very strange experience of relationship with other humans. So it's just a different way of approaching it. Today's...
You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am Philippe Andre Coquette, and this is my partner.
Max Aaron.
And this is my boyfriend.
Jim.
Jim Abbott. This is
my friend.
Brad Amberhart, and Max is a lover of mine, a favorite lover.
So we have all the, that's all of our kind of connections. The thing we wanted to talk about today is agreements, which seem to be a very important part of a ethical non-monogamy style of relationship. One of the things I was thinking about was, where does this idea of agreements come from? And so what are we trying to make new? The history of monogamy always includes marriage. And marriage is a bond. It's a business agreement originally between two men, the father of a woman and a man who wanted to buy her, basically. That's kind of the bottom line. And in most cultures, this is still the case. With those agreements, so that's the initial agreement. It's a financial agreement. So at some point it became a religious agreement. At some point it became a legal agreement. All these things added on to, which is that you will, when I buy you as a person, you will give me children and you will stay faithful, I guess, and raise those children. And that's really the agreement. And he didn't have to do anything except maybe keep the food coming, right? So it's very tribal, it's very ancient, it's very basic, it's very economic. So when we're talking about agreements, we're talking about obviously something way different. The marriage agreements, the marriage vows have evolved a lot since then. Most people I know who've gotten married, whether they're hetero or homosexual relationships, they are more, people write their own vows and they're taking the obey out of the thing. And some of them are taking the till death do us part out of the thing. And even the love, honor, and cherish, all those different agreements that are just became kind of just the way things are done for most of the world. People are changing that stuff up. So I just wanted to set that as that's kind of the bottom line of what we've all been programmed to believe the agreements between people are. And as queer men, we've definitely changed a lot of that for many centuries, I think. We always had to have our own rules. We always had to make our own things because we didn't have the whole children and family piece of it, the economic piece of it. So
or the permission to enter into that as a legal agreement.
Yeah. So, but then that's kind of changed again now because we can get married. So it's an interesting place we're at in terms of how we look at agreements. So that's just kind of I just wanted to lay that as kind of a foundation of the history of what we're breaking away from or making new.
And I wanted to add that, for all of us, all of us that are also single, we make agreements with ourselves. So an agreement with yourself might be to nurture yourself, to feed yourself, to have good boundaries, like to listen to your boundaries, to express them. So the reason to reflect upon that is often if we expect another person, particularly subconsciously, to adhere to our inner agreements, we have to first question, are we holding agreements with ourselves? Are we being authentic with what we desire, what we want, and are we able to express that? I found, for an example, with my heteronormative friends as a counselor in the past, a lot of marital mate-to difficulties came from the assumption that you should know what I need. I shouldn't have to tell you. And that can cause a lot of conflicts.
Yeah. It still does when it happens. If it happens, it can happen with me for sure. Anything you guys want to say about, so that's about agreements, Brad or Jim? Just in general, before we maybe talk about our own little specific ways that we do it.
I'd just like to say that's such a beautiful, eloquent introduction, and it's really inspiring. So thank you for framing it that way. Really excited about it.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it's good to think about agreements as a flexible baseline to begin something. And I think that people that try to enter into any kind of sexual relationship with too many agreements can really suffer. So for example, people can have agreements about fluid exchange. They can have agreements about STD testing, agreements about if you go out bowling with your guys, that's only on Fridays, it's not on Wednesdays. There could be lots of different agreements that make you feel safe, comfortable, and people usually negotiate that fairly unspoken.
Which can be a problem, actually.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it leads to the assumption that
Like, what do you
this
mean?
is the way things are.
Not Friday.
Right.
Like,
and
you only see Jimmy on Fridays.
there are some relationships, there are some people for whom a very specific agreements, many agreements, make the relationship work. I have seen that happen. I tend to favor a pretty loose agreement style. But there are people, you go back to where people have the kind of don't ask, don't tell relationship, which I know a lot of hetero couples do, long-term married couples. They have a thing of like, okay, you can go and do the things you do, especially the woman saying that to the man. Go ahead and do those things you do. Just don't bring it back to me. I don't want to hear about it.
Only at Burning Man.
Well, that's not our parents' version, but so even like our parents' generation, I think there were a lot of men who just were able to do what they wanted to do as long as they didn't have to. The woman didn't want to hear about it. She didn't want her friends to know about it. As long as it was secret. The whole thing of on the down low, which in many cultures is very prevalent.
And of course, she would never have the permission to go do what she wanted to do, right? Given the male-dominated relationship.
Well, and she didn't even usually think that she could even desire that. Because women were not allowed to be sexual beings other than with their husband, so yeah.
And there's still a lot of societies current time where a woman is only allowed in certain rooms or can't leave the house, or if she leaves the house, can only leave the house to go to market and all covered up. Like it's a really interesting, um, like even there could be death penalties for leaving the house without the right amount of clothes on. So like things we take for granted here in a more Western, we consider ourselves so free. But I think the point is we often project the lack of freedom onto another or the ownership of their time and space. So Philippe and I prefer, and I think this probably includes Jim and Brad, but you could ask them. We prefer like a very light, flexible agreement. And I'll give you an example of that is if we say like, oh, would you like to go to, you guys like to go to the movies? If they open up the movies, let's go on Thursday. And you go, oh, that sounds great. Check back with me Wednesday night or Thursday morning. So you can have an agreement. It could be even a soul agreement. Like you really want your buddies there, but it's still flexible depending on the mood, depending on the weather. When people make monogamous agreements, they like to make an agreement once. And it's sort of like, I want you to be at the movies with me every Thursday for the rest of your life. And the reason this is important is that we take it for granted that sometimes we meet a person and we have this juicy, hot sense of emotional and sexual connection with them. And part of the romance often is the intrigue of the unknown, like not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing what kind of hormonal surges you're going to feel in your body, or the fact that they may just, they may move in bed in a way that you're not used to. So if we find that attractive piece of meat, then it was like, oh, well, I would sort of like to purchase this package and make sure that you're available in this way for long term. We used to call it in our relationship course, securing the supply. So we want that supply of hot, juicy meat, and we want to secure it that it's just going to stay around and won't disappear. So there's sort of I would say, a problem with our psychology, our brain, being that we actually lose the sense of intrigue and excitement through our need to secure that that person's going to always be there in the same way, or not surprise us by, say, bringing someone else home on Thursday.
You're smart.
So it's subtle, but it's good to think about, including in our relationships with ourselves. And I think that's one of the things that, being psychologically open to multiple relationships is it does allow for more flexibility, surprise, unusual new experiences, and prevents us from getting stuck in our own security ruts.
Wow.
Which could also, on the other side of it, some of us tend to be anxiety driven. So, we have like some part of us that's afraid. We're afraid of abandonment. We're afraid of conflict, or we're afraid of disease, or we're afraid of, we have a lot of us humans, lack of resources. So a lot of us have that kind of hardwired into us. So it can be more challenging to have this kind of open-ended lack of agreements. And I think that's, so what I have found is that I need to find my own edges with that within the process of the relationship. Like, what is really what makes me really uncomfortable? What do I need to know to make me feel safe? And can I take responsibility for that myself? That's the hard one. To ask for that, to say, okay, my particular need is that, for instance, that I want to know that whoever you're involved with on the regular, if you're having like whether it's a fuck buddy or a person or lover or a metamor, which they call that, the word for it, like a paramour, metamor. So if that person, they have to like me. So if you're with somebody regularly, they have to like me. If they don't like me, and if I don't feel like they like me, I don't feel safe. Somehow that's like the agreement. That's like a bottom line thing that I just don't want to deal with in my life, having somebody who doesn't like me involved with my partner.
Or more, what we often express is that if we were to bring another person into, let's say, into just the two of us, that person respects our pre-established bond.
Right.
And the fact that we're primary partners is important, but that, that could also shift. But still that someone that would respect and enjoy the fact that Philippe and I are bonded. Or in this case, that the four of us are bonded, or the 4 or 5 of us are bonded. Yeah. So this is something that I find younger queer couples often don't think of the obvious. And this surprises me, but we have seen it quite a lot, where let's say it's a young couple, maybe they're together for some years or mated, married, and they bring someone into their relationship that really just wants to be with one of them. And we really prefer that the other person just disappear. Or there just is a personality conflict, like they just can't be in the same room. Like there's just, they don't blend their energies. So for Philippe and I, that would be a bottom line. Like we might be attracted to the other person, but it's just not going to work. And it's not going to work within our pre-established boundaries. But we have seen people try to have that work for quite a few years. Usually it becomes increasingly awkward, as you can imagine.
I got a question. What if you just want to get together with somebody that's really hot and fuck, and they don't really have to like Philippe, right? I mean, especially if you go do it somewhere else. You're talking about mainly if it's someone you regularly see and bring into the house, right?
Well, even if it's not bringing in the house, I mean, that definitely would be the case. Even one time, that would be awkward. If he wanted to, like if Max was fucking somebody and that person came over and we did not match.
Yeah, that's bad.
And I wouldn't want him to bring him in the house again, definitely. But even, if he was seeing that person on the regular, even outside, it would still feel weird to me. Like even if they didn't, not only if bringing it into the house, but also just even.
Well, there's some people that, and this is where the psychology becomes interesting, which is more than we talked about today, but some people really like their high is getting in between two other people, and separating them. And I actually had a straight boyfriend that like his girlfriend who like her motivation was often to get in between other friendships and disturb them. So sometimes we don't know that when we first meet a person. And it's quite different in terms of like you're saying, hot fuck buddy, that's maybe an occasional. And I don't really consider that personally polyamory. It's just more like, I'm a gay guy fucking around. I don't think in my mind is that is polyamory.
Yeah.
The open relationship.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The main distinction is the minute that it becomes clear that that person that you're enjoying fucking really doesn't like Philippe or might even be divisive, then you cut it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just somebody you see occasionally for raw, wonderful, delicious sex. And
yeah. And it also might be me that says, I'm uncomfortable with this, because he may not even realize what's going on. So then it has to be me also who checks in and says, am I just being jealous? Or is this really something that feels like a real existential threat to myself or the relationship? Because it could just be me being jealous and going, oh, you like them better than me, and So I don't want you to be with them.
Right.
People do that too, but for me, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to be in that place. So I always have to check in with myself with these feelings, to see where it's actually coming from, if there is any evidence or if it's just me being insecure.
Mm.
It's usually pretty obvious, but I think that does come with some maturity. And we've had, I think it's only happened once, we have relationships where, a lover of mine was friends with both of us, but it became more clear that they weren't really supportive of who we are, even though they were friendly and going through the motions of that. It was deeper down, it was not the case.
Like for instance, I relish the fact that Max and Philippe have a home, that that they cultivate community there, that they're happy, that they go traveling together. It never even crossed my mind that I wouldn't want that for them. It's only I really want the very best for them. I honored the fact that Max's mother was alive until she was 90, that they cared for her, that they built a community. There's so much I love about them. That's quite different than, yeah, I can't even imagine wanting ill will for them.
Well,
So,
what it is if you wanted for some reason to possess one of us,
yeah,
that's the only reason you would be like, the reason this works with the four of us is because we all love each other in our own different ways and also love what the relationship that the other ones are having brings. So I love the relationship that Brad and Jim have. I also love the relationship that Max and Jim have. I also love the relationship that Max and Brad have. Like, all of those things make me feel good.
could I ask a question of, well, I guess it's hard to ask you permission to ask a question if you don't know what the question is, but a year ago when we were all camping, or maybe 2 years ago even, there was this unusual instance where I was making love with Max for a while, and Max was making love with Jimmy for a while. And I believe that that might have been a little difficult for you at the time. There was something that happened when you witnessed Max and Jimmy together, I believe. I'm sorry to bring it up if you don't remember, but I recall you witnessed them in an act of lovemaking and you hadn't seen it before, and it kind of startled you. Like, maybe, I think you
I remember. I don't remember the exact incident,
Yeah.
but the content what Philippe reported later, and is somewhat intimate, is that like seeing Jiminy totally engage with somebody else in a way that you, Jim, do with Philippe.
right.
I was like, oh, well, and I can relate to that.
That's what it was. So it was a feeling that I wasn't jealous of them, the two of them. I was jealous that he could be the same way with someone else that he is with me, which made me less special.
Yeah.
That's basically like how it felt. It felt like, oh my God, he's like this with everybody. That's just who he is, which is, of course, what I love about him. And it was also like, I thought I was the special one.
Right.
So yeah, that was interesting. That's a good one, Brad.
Yeah, I knew that was kind of a delicate matter to bring up, but there was something juicy and rich there.
Yeah. It was a good one. It was like, whoa.
I mean, it's interesting that you would have felt that way if you saw him with a complete stranger, if the level of intensity and magic was what you associated with what he shares with you, and you saw him with a stranger at a bathhouse or at a camp out, you might have felt the same, but that person he was with just happened to be your partner.
Yeah, I think it actually would have been more disturbing if it was with a stranger at a bathhouse.
He could actually cultivate that level of intimacy with a stranger like he does routinely as his profession.
Absolutely, and I actually do that too. So that's what I had to come to. I'm like, oh well, if he saw me with people, probably feel the same thing.
Yeah, I think I might be a little scared if I saw how intimate you could get with somebody you just met. I might be.
Maybe.
Especially if it was as hot as it used to be when we were in the earlier stages of our 8-year relationship. The sex was much more passionate in general, more frequent, prolonged, exciting, joyful, expressive. And if I saw him do that with somebody now, I might take a step back.
Mhm.
I mean, not that I wouldn't get through it. It's just, I think it's already been pointed out that the wild, passionate, ecstatic sex we associate with the earlier years of our relationship generally does not last for 10 years. I mean, Jimmy and I still have incredibly ecstatic encounters. They're just, they're not as frequent, and they're definitely different than they were 4 years ago. And if I saw him have that with somebody else, I probably would need to do some processing, you know, for myself, or a little bit of therapy.
That was it kind of interesting that we're talking about watching that, because that's something the four of us experienced. And I think it's harder when it's in your imagination, like you're imagining Jiminy. Now, this is like the typical, again, the monogamous model is I'm imagining my girlfriend off with this amazing, sexy young hunk.
Well
You know,
hung.
maybe they're just actually reading books together and really, you know, enjoying the cuddle time. But my mind is creating the worst fantasy that triggers me the most.
And makes you want to literally kill them, because people, you know, this is the classic
That's
thing,
true.
is that murder is often on the other end of that story. You know, classic literature, in so many of what we see, you know, if we're looking at things on TV or a podcast about murder, how many times it's about
Yeah.
jealousy. Like wars have been started over this kind of thing. Such a passion of our imagination of what somebody else might be experiencing with someone else, who should be reserving only that, only for me. So it is interesting.
We're going to
that,
talk about that next week too.
yeah.
So, any of you that are listening, do you have any examples of agreements or questions, situations in the past that have come up, or that you can imagine where it would be unclear to you what to ask for? For me, it often works. Yeah, go ahead.
I was long ago, I was involved in a relationship that lasted 4 years and 4 months with a man who, when we began, was in an open relationship with his partner of 11 years. And this sort of set things up for me as an ideal almost, because right from the beginning, everything was spelled out for me. And it was acceptable for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm aware of how such a relationship can function.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What made it so good for you in particular, your particular personality, you think?
Oh, this is difficult. um, I come from a family background where I experienced literal abandonment as an infant, and also abuse as a child, physical, psychological, verbal abuse, not sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I've sought in a relationship is what I didn't get from my family. And especially someone who could listen and show some type of understanding. And that's what was provided from the get-go. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I'd like to ask, what were the agreements that were spelled out, since I believe the topic is agreements? If you entered this relationship with somebody that was in a partnership and you said it was all spelled out clearly, I think it would be valuable to hear what was spelled out.
The first thing that was made clear is that this was a secondary relationship, not a primary relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That the two of them were a dedicated couple. And that it wasn't going to go beyond that. And that was acceptable to me because it was fulfilling particular needs of mine.
Yes. And for him, evidently, a lot of wonderful needs were fulfilled. It was probably exciting,
Yes.
and passionate.
Yes.
Did you have a relationship of any kind with his partner?
Not now.
But when it was happening?
the, the, the man that I was involved with eventually struggled with multiple myeloma for 3 years and passed away.
Wow.
And so his partner and I sort of drifted apart because there was also an age difference involved. Them being about 10 years older than me.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a lovely healing experience for you.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And it has yet to be duplicated.
Yeah.
I appreciate what John is saying is that if you actually, if we were to interview our friends and track their relationships, like there's so many different types and change and unexpected changes, like people dying, people moving away, people, it's just life happens to us and relationships flow along or separate accordingly. So, our brains and our emotions have this capacity to project an ideal like that. I'll find the person that will flow through all those changes with me. But I think the people that are really successful in polyamorous relationships adjust themselves psychologically to impermanence. Even if it means that the 2 or 4 of us are going to be together until the end, it almost doesn't matter because internally we know that it could change in a couple months and there could be a different dynamic. And that is really frightening to some people. Just basic bottom line.
Yeah, I think actually some of that. So often this word agreement is about, it kind of goes with the word vow, which is some kind of commitment. And we have such a thing about commitment in our world because there's so many options now that we didn't have in our parents' generations and things. There's so many options for people all the time. So everybody wants to leave their kind of options open. So there's this kind of societal story that men in particular are commitment phobic and that we can't commit and we just like run off and, we get women pregnant and then run off and leave them with the child rearing, or we don't want to get married, and there's this whole thing, you got to put a ring on it because if you don't get married, the guy's not going to stay around. It's this whole weird thing about kind of trapping a man into a commitment, which is, kind of a different version of the agreement that we used to have. And I find that that's true with a lot of gay men as well, have the same idea that men are commitment phobic. And I'm wondering about, does anybody have any feelings about that kind of idea about men, that we can't keep agreements?
I want to say something, but not specifically about that. Just what popped into my head was just about the word agreement versus commitment. They kind of have similar meanings, but commitment feels more, there's like a strength to it. There's like more permanence to it in my mind versus an agreement, which kind of automatically in my mind lends itself to renegotiation. Whereas commitment almost feels like it doesn't, like it's been decided, this is the way it is. Whereas an agreement is maybe a little more flowy.
Yeah.
And which would you prefer?
Yeah.
Agreement. Yeah.
Well, I feel like last
As much as change sometimes is difficult for me, it's like it often like takes me a minute, but it's like I'm open to it. It just takes me a minute to kind of make the adjustment.
yeah. And I think that, like what I'm hearing Jim say, like there's certain things I'm committed to that are different than the things I agree to.
Yeah.
And I felt like last week, Brad was really expressing a commitment, the way he was committed to you. It's a little bit different than saying, I agree to pay attention to you.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
something very deep, like honoring, of that bond.
So what if a commitment was something that we experience and an agreement is something we do? Like in a way, I think we've turned the experience of commitment, because like if I start a project that I'm really interested in and it feels like I have the energy for, I'm just a person who's going to see it through to the end. Like I want to finish the cycle. I want to see it come to fruition. So, and the same way with a relationship. Like I'm just going to see it through, and it's a natural part of who I am. But then to put like an outer kind of false I don't know what the word is, but thing on it that I'm making a commitment and it's like a contract, that doesn't feel as good to me as just knowing that I have an internal commitment to someone or to something that I'm involved with. So I don't know, feels more that's why, because I like the word agreement better too. Also because an agreement is between two people. Like I agree with you about this thing. I just thought of that. It's like the word agreement is agreeing on something. We actually both believe the same thing in the moment. So we're having that agreement until we don't.
Commitments are often one way.
Oh.
Yes.
You say something more about that?
I don't know, just as you were talking about, oh, I'm committed to this. It's like you're committed to that thing or that person, unless they've said or what their commitment is. There's no reciprocity. It's like you're committed to this thing. That thing doesn't care shit about you. Whether you complete it or whatever, It's all about what you've committed to.
Mhm.
Well, it seems like that would be the glue that holds together a community, even if it goes this way and then it goes that way, it comes back around.
Mhm. It's still only it.
I mean, and I think you probably do care that I'm committed to you and that I value you and cherish you as a core presence in my life, as my very best friend, uh, on whom I focus the priority in my relationships. I mean, I think that probably does matter. And that thing is you. That thing is the relationship that you and I value. I don't know if that could be just one way. I don't really expect anything back except that
Yeah, but it is your commitment, Brad. I mean, I think that's what he's saying. Like,
Yeah.
the important thing to you, maybe, I mean, this is what I feel like, is my commitment.
yeah.
Like, that's, it's taking that, it's because that's what I hear you saying, is that it is, the important thing is that I am committed to Max. I am committed to that, to having that relationship go to wherever it needs to go to.
So whether or not I'm committed is really my responsibility. It's not yours. But I feel it's safe to say you're happy to receive that gift.
Yes.
It's just that it doesn't involve action from you other than receiving.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I would want to analyze what's his commitment to me. It never crossed my mind. I don't think I care. I mean, I must care, but it's not like a big concern of mine. I don't sit here questioning how committed he is to me. It never crossed my mind.
Right, and I think that's kind of what I'm saying, is like those commitments kind of go in one direction. What the agreements, it's like like Philippe was saying, you kind of have both come to a central point
An
about
agreement.
something.
Right. I love
The
that.
commitment, like in our household, we're doing a project, the 6 of us together. And so we are committed to certain values. We're presenting certain values that we share, certain values that we share with others, that we're committed to upholding certain values. We haven't really written it down, but that's an experience that we have. And it's different than agreement, like we agreed to meet Wednesday night for our, Zoom meeting, or agree to follow through on certain, behaviors that we have, goals that we have. So I think it's similar in successful relationships, that if you're committed to similar values, it gives a strong basis for the relationship to flourish. And it's okay to have a certain percentage of values that are different. Like, we know people now that are in, different political parties, that are married and have children, or that are in different amounts of fear around COVID and different behaviors with COVID, and yet they share their households together. But if you had a lot of differences of the things you ultimately value, particularly in polyamory, I think it would probably break down after some months or years. It would become really stressful.
I just want to point out for people who are listening that may not completely know the context, that Max and Philippe live in a household with a diversity of people of different sexual orientations and genders and value systems. Jimmy and I each have our own house separate from theirs. We discussed that last week, but in case people didn't hear that. So Max is now speaking to the fact that he lives in a household of 6 people with Philippe. And what unites them as a household is that they have certain values that they're committed to that overlap enough for them to live together. And there are other values that some of them hold that are not shared with the others, but there's enough value and commonality and appreciation and commitment to honor one another's values. So there's a commitment to certain values that they hold. And I find it interesting that you're talking about the commitment not being between or among people, but a commitment to common values or aspirations or, yes, commitment to certain things or aspects of life that you value. That's what holds you together. It's not your commitment just to each other. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, people often like, Brad and I like to often have very little or no clothes on. And so when my friends hear about that, they go like, oh, wow, that's like an amazing place. I'd love to visit. It must be like one constant orgy. And actually, we don't have orgies at our house, and it's not even that sexual, but we're all super erotic beings. But people have the idea, well, if you don't have too many clothes on and there's naked men, it must be just like an orgy all day long.
And I suppose if we were 30,
Oh, maybe
that might be the case.
I don't know, part of what, there's at least one hetero-identified man in their house. And I have a really close friend that's a straight guy.
Yeah.
And we all went camping not long ago. And one of the things they most appreciate is they can arrive and take off all their clothes. And there's no assumption at all. In fact, it's already been clearly agreed. I don't desire you sexually, my straight friend. I'm not here because I need sex. I have a great sex life. I'm just happy that you feel safe with me and you can be free to be who you are. So yeah, the values and the perceptions of what's valued are, also quite different. From the outside, it must be a naked hippie orgy. For us, it's, wow, a sense that people can feel safe in our presence. I love the fact that we have straight men in our community that live with us and value nakedness, value freedom of expression. Yeah.
You want to say something, Dave?
So would the four of you ever consider living under one roof, or do you just value the present and just want to keep it that way?
What a delicate question.
I don't think I've ever really thought about it. Maybe.
Yeah, it just hasn't. It hasn't come up. I think we've made jokes about it. Like we've made, at least I have with Jiminy, we've talked about maybe we'll like have a winter home in Fort Lauderdale and we can all share it together. We've had that kind of discussion.
There may be one coming up in P-Town.
Yeah, or in Provincetown, or somewhere like that. That would be a thing. I think Jim and Brad so much enjoy living in their own space for whatever reason. That what?
At times.
At times, yeah.
We both have roommates, by the way.
Yeah, that's true. But haven't all the time.
And unless I shifted my value system in the last year, which I guess things are always shifting, but one of my favorite and like cynical, funny things to say to people has been the best way to ruin a perfectly wonderful sexual relationship is move in together.
Right.
And I wasn't about to live with him when the heat of passion was alive. That was the last thing I wanted to do. As we settle into like, should I dare say, maybe slightly more like an older, more mature couple. No, I still don't think I want to live with him. It's too scary. And sometimes I wish we could be together and wake up together and share the morning together. But then when I start to try to imagine the rest of the day or the night or the life, I'm like, that's too much. Sometimes I wish I could live in their little cottage out back, but then I'm like, well, where would I have enough space to be me? And we often have conversations, sometimes they're tangential, like so-and-so takes up so much space. Like, you should see that girl. She comes in the kitchen, she's like so excited, like, whoo, look what I'm doing. I want to talk to you. And Max is like, well, I just don't really feel like somebody taking up that much space. And he says, you kind of do that, but not like her, of course. Right, I kind of do that, but not like her. Sure, yeah, I don't know what it would be like to live together. So what we've been doing though is there's a progression that we spend more and more and more time together as a foursome. And we went to P-Town a few years ago on a vacation. It was the first time we had ever all been together for a period of days or even a whole week. And when I got back, I was ecstatic and I actually grieved. I grieved
Mm.
the separation, that something like that could live for a magical moment, that it's important to cherish that magical moment and make as many of them as possible, but not to become attached to it and think this is the way I want it to be all the time. Because, you know, it's like I used to scoff when I would go to these magic tantra retreats. There'd be 12 men having sex with each other for 4 days in a log cabin in the forest. And at the end, people would say things like, oh my God, like we should just do this all the time. We need to create community and live together. And I'm like, bitch, it's not going to look the same if you're together all the time rather than 4 magical days when you put your whole life aside, your phone's off, you're not on Zoom, your mama's not calling, you're unavailable, and you're connecting with men. I mean, we can't do that our whole lives. I mean, maybe we could, but something's going to change, a major technological failure where WhatsApp doesn't work anymore and our phone's off. Sorry, that was my soliloquy about the whole living together.
Well said, Brad. Well said.
Heard.
And I would say, yes, I've had those fantasies, and that's, yeah, I don't know. At times I think that would be, yeah, a lot of fun. And other
Aw,
times I'm like, I don't know.
let's just camp for a week for now.
There's probably a fear of ruining it if we did, but.
Well, I always fantasize that we'll end up in a tiny home community in the mountains on like 400 acres, you know, because I would just build it.
Four little houses next to each other.
Well, I think more like 16 houses.
Well, I
so
mean,
that-
for us, I mean, that
Yeah.
just for us.
well, even like traveling the 3 weeks now with Philippe, I'm like, oh, how long is this relationship going to go on? It's like,
Something changes when there's a sense that we might be able to relate to other people and still maintain a connection to our core autonomy and our sense of sanctuary and peace. You know, that there's a core sanctuary and peace we need to maintain. For me, that means a lot of space.
Yeah.
It may be because we have American values and we could stand to let go of some of our rigid boundaries about having our own protective space. But for now, I like the idea of 400 acres and 16 little houses with lots of space. I could do that.
I do not want to give up my home, which I love so much, with my partner and the other people I live with, and being able to escape to the pristine environment that is Jiminy's house on occasion and just feel the expansion and the way that we get to just merge into each other in a certain way. That's, yeah, I wouldn't want to give that up. I mean, that's a fabulous aspect of our relationship that would be very different if we lived in a, you know, big house together.
True.
In a way, we have something better than 400 acres and lots of little houses. We have a whole city and lots of little houses.
It's true.
big houses. Well, it kind of reminds me of, I think, some of the most successful long-term poly relationships have been involving at least one long-distance partner.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised how often I hear about that. We run into it on this trip in Provincetown, where their partner lives in London, or they live in Seattle, or, you know, different country.
Yeah.
It seems to happen fairly often, and maybe because of careers or family, they can't or don't want to relocate to one city.
Yeah, they spend like 1 week together a month, or
Yeah.
it's quite common. Of course, that's for most people, it's a result of immense privilege. You know, there are people who make a lot of money and can have 3 homes in different countries and things like that. It might be more difficult, like Brad was saying, if you're kind of in, like, living in Nepal or something and everybody lives in one house.
Yeah.
Although, notice there in many countries like that, there are often people who go off on little excursions up into the mountains by themselves for periods of time in order to feel their own autonomy, or
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've often wondered traveling when I'm in a household with a family of 16. It's like, where the fuck do people go to fuck, and how did all these kids get made? I mean,
Well,
I think it's the river for my grandma and her family growing up in a house of 7 children. They called it the creek bank. And if they said, oh, she's on the creek bank, everybody knew what that meant.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't exactly acceptable. They still talk about her as the slut that she was. Don't you think? She was always on the creek bank. But they had the creek bank, you know. We're not just talking about foreign countries. We come from a culture where until recent generations, it was, well, at least where I come from, my grandparents had 7 and 12 siblings.
Wow.
My grandparents did too. Yeah, lots of them. So many that my parents only had one. They were both single children. Because it went the other direction.
You tell me there wasn't some version of polyamory in existence. It's like,
Oh, yeah. Usually, yeah. Lots of illegitimate children going on.
yeah.
So I think we're
tree.
coming to the end of our time, but I'd love to hear anything that anybody would like to say about what we've been talking about today. If you have any questions or comments, critiques.
Well, one thing I would say, and this is kind of also related to the David Kamala, some of her teaching as a poly teacher in California, that if agreements are specific, they tend to work better. Like some people in her group had an agreement that if you're going to visit your lover, that you'd come back and sleep with me for the night. No, and that wouldn't be an agreement that I would need, but that was one that she had expressed. And I had one where I think we mentioned before, like not having sex in my bed if I wasn't home. That, for some reason, that just felt sensitive to me. And it's pretty easy to follow because it's not.
You did.
Maybe don't.
Well, except for it's only Jiminy, so that was okay.
Yeah, well, Jiminy's kind of part of my aura.
But not like some strange person you didn't know.
Someone I didn't know.
Yeah.
And it's easy to follow or agree to an agreement if it's specific, which is really different than, love me forever.
Does the bad boy in you ever want to break an agreement and bring a stripper home or something?
No, I got my own bed.
No, Max.
Oh, him.
Uh-huh.
Well, I don't have that need.
He doesn't have that need, so I could bring the stripper to his bed.
Yeah, that would be fine as long as they like me.
That's a really good example of what I need is not necessarily going to be what he needs. So we don't have to agree. We don't have to agree about beds. It's just my.
You don't have an agreement that you're not going to bring a guy home and fuck in the same bed that you sleep in with him.
Right.
No.
So
you sleep in separate beds anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I might want to have sex with somebody in his bed because he has a nicer bed.
Uh-huh.
But I honor that I'm not going to bring a strange person into his bed.
You'll at least send me a text first, right?
And he has the agreement. So he doesn't really care as much that somebody, like it's not a specific need for him that somebody like him.
I had a lover that was, well, not a lover, a very attractive fuck buddy that I saw once a year that turned into quite a meth addict. And so part of our agreement is not to have drug uses in our house.
Other than, 420 and whatever.
Oh, ganja, 420, CBD.
Yeah.
Are you saying not to have guys over who are using drugs or not to have guys over who use them in general?
Yeah, both.
Both. So if somebody uses meth or coke anywhere, they're not generally someone that you bring to your house to have sex.
Right. So that's just an example of a specific agreement. we had recently a good fairy friend that was coming over that was making everyone feel uncomfortable. So it wasn't about drugs or sex, but it was, we had to all sit down and talk about it because that person's behavior was making people feel very weird.
Oh,
So that was just recently.
Yeah.
it's interesting. I feel sorry for that person, even though I don't even know who it is. So I still have empathy for somebody that came over and was making everybody uncomfortable.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why it was uncomfortable, is that we were feeling a lot of empathy. And so it felt, there was a lot, so we had to talk about it, with ourselves and with him too, because it ended up that what we all want for him is to establish his own sovereignty as a human being and not,
Have his own space. Yeah.
yeah, to have his own space. And so it turned into a real positive, still in progress.
Well, that's a good point. Our agreement turned into a very positive conversation and a series of connections.
Yeah.
That was very supportive for all of us.
Wow.
Any other questions before we close, or comments, or things you'd like to hear us talk about in the next few weeks?
I love seeing all of your faces.
Appreciative audience.
I'm also noticing, especially with a small group like this, there have been some deep, intimate spots that were touched. We do not regularly get together and have these discussions, and they would not be nearly as powerful without, they would not be the same, nothing like this, without the level of power that you hold in being a witness and your questions. So I would really love to inspire people to invite your friends to these discussions. We're going to be doing them at least 2 more weeks. I'm going to send out just send an announcement. I'll send an email. You can forward it to people, because not that bigger is better. Like we have generated some very powerful insight today that has been recorded, and I feel I'm going to release this one in audio on my podcast so that more people can tap into the wisdom that you helped to summon. So just want to again amplify the power of a small circle of people being of loving witness and daring to ask these questions in a space where we feel safe. Other people will be inspired by hearing what you've asked, and your questions brought about some insight that we wouldn't just, 4 talking heads, but I don't think we would have come up with this insight. It's really powerful to be witnessed and know that other people are being supported as well.
Very well said.
Yeah. Well, thank you for letting us join you in this space.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I enjoyed the small group.
Yes, I'm looking forward to the next 2 sessions.
Me too.
Yeah.
We are too.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Bye, Tim.
Okay, take care. Okay.